And good morning. We are live streaming Sunday School this morning, first time from home, so bear with me as I probably will have several mistakes that you usually don't see. I cut them out before I upload the video, but I thought maybe today we would go with the live stream instead, since we do have a few things to go over. For those of you that don't know, services are canceled today, and for the moment, as far as we know, probably next couple of Sundays. We did have a positive test for COVID-19 in the congregation, so we'll go over that here and again in a few minutes, more details there. But we'll get started out with a couple of announcements. The first one, the turkey donations and grocery bags for the food bank. If you have any of those or would like to do anything with that, please contact Gloria. Operation Christmas Child boxes are due, and you can contact Donna V regarding that. And Meals on Wheels, if you'd like to purchase some of those meals for those that are in need, they're $3.16 a meal, and you can also contact Donna V regarding that. The Belk sale is going on. Please contact Betty Doss regarding the Belk sale. And we are actually looking for a new IT person to kind of take over the YouTube streaming and such, since I am moving to Sweden within the next year or so, so we're just trying to be on top of the ball there and make sure we got somebody that can take care of all of that for us. And of course you can contact me regarding that. Now for the COVID-19, we did have a member of our congregation test positive for COVID-19, and if you attended services on November 8th, this past Sunday, then you may have been exposed. We encourage you to follow the guidelines set up by the CDC, contact your local doctor and see if you need to get tested yourself. And just pray for the congregation and in general for the church that nobody is seriously ill because of this. If you'd like to contact anybody about this and you don't have their contact information, just leave a comment in the below on this video, or you can email faithpresbyteriansc@gmail.com. So that's all the announcements we have. Today in Sunday School, we're going to be going over Revelation 8. We're going to read it, of course, and then we'll have a little devotional about that. And again, as always, the sources I use are linked in the description below, and I encourage you to check them out because they are really good study guides for these, and I don't go over everything that's in these study guides. So, without further ado, Revelation 8, verses 1 through 13. And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star was called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them were darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. And I beheld, and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. go to there. It's a first mistake. All right, and that is Revelation chapter 8, where we begin to have the final seal broken and the consequences thereof. So we'll just go ahead and jump right on into it, and we'll start off by talking about the seventh seal itself. From verse 1, the silence in heaven. And when you open the seventh seal, there's silence in heaven for about half an hour. The sealed scroll was introduced in Revelation 5, and the seals were opened one by one up until the sixth seal in Revelation 6. And we waited for the last seal to be opened and the contents of the scroll to be revealed. But we were given the pause, of course, as we saw last lesson in Revelation 6, where we had the 144,000, the great multitude of the great tribulation. And now the idea of a pause between the sixth and the seventh seal is emphasized with a silence in heaven for about half an hour when the seal itself is broken. So this silence is important because some have seen it as a breathing space, or that the angels are silent so the prayers of the saints can be heard, and even perhaps the cry of the martyrs from Revelation 6, 9 through 11. The most supported theory is that the silence in heaven demonstrates a sober, awestruck silence at the judgment to come, now that the seals are off and the scroll can be opened. So it's an anticipation of what is in there. There's no other barriers between us or between the angels, those in heaven, and seeing what is now in this scroll. It's like if you're opening a gift at your birthday or Christmas, when you get to that last piece of tape or that last piece of the wrappers coming off, you're finally getting to see what was inside of here. And the half-hour silence, though, imagine waiting half an hour to take off the last piece of wrapper from your gift. It is a long time to wait for something that you're just going to read or you're going to look at. But things seem long and short in their context. If a preacher were to stop his sermon and remain silent for 10 minutes, it would seem like an eternity. However, since heaven is a place of constant praise and worship to God, which we found out in Revelation 4, 8 through 9, silence for about half an hour is a long time. It is, so in the context, in a sermon, a preacher typically preaches for about 30 minutes. So if he paused for 10 minutes, that's a good chunk of his time. If he preached for 6 hours and paused for 10 minutes, maybe not so long. But in this case here, a place where there's no stopping, there's not been any other kind of pause. This 30 minutes of pausing the praise and worship of God is a very substantial statement here. And then in verse 2, we are introduced to 7 angels and 7 trumpets. And the phrase, "and to them were given 7 trumpets," in the Old Testament, trumpets sounded the alarm for war and threw the enemy into a panic, or they called an assembly of God's people. And these 7 trumpets will sound as God's battle alarm during the Great Tribulation. And then we have another angel, the 8th angel. Some see this angel as Jesus, functioning as a mediator, and because the Old Testament refers to Jesus as the angel of the Lord. And of course there's another theory that it could only be a mere angelic being, because the specific ancient Greek word for other means another of the same kind. So again, this is I lean a little more towards the second theory there, because the Bible is always written very specifically using the language of the time. And being that the original Greek word just means another of the exact same kind, that it is most likely just an 8th angel, and not the angel of the Lord or Jesus, as the Old Testament sometimes used. We also find the golden censer. If you remember from previous chapters, that these typically represent the prayers of the people, the prayers of God's people, and the incense raising up was the prayers being brought up to heaven to Jesus and to God. Prayer and incense are often associated in the Bible. The idea is that just as incense is precious, pleasant, and drifts to heaven, so do our prayers. So here, before anything happens at the opening of the 7th seal, the prayers of God's people come before the Lord God. And so even as he's opening this scroll and opening the seals, he is still hearing our prayers before he proceeds with what is in the scroll. But then the angel takes a censer, fills it with fire from the altar, and throws it to the earth. As God's people pray for the resolution of all things, their prayers are touched by the fire from the altar in heaven and then thrown back down to the earth. All things will not be resolved on this earth until judgment comes, and when the prayers of God's people come back to the earth, they bring the groundswell of judgment. So this is a kind of a symbolic of all those prayers finally being answered. I'm sure we've all had prayers, requests that we don't get the answer to immediately. Sometimes we do get the answer weeks, months, maybe years later. And I'm sure there's still some that we have not gotten answered, and we probably won't get the answer until the final judgment. And this is at least as I understand it, a representation of that final judgment coming in and all those prayers finally being answered. Excuse me. So the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. So after the eighth angel throws the censer with the fire back to the earth, the seven angels prepare to sound their trumpets. So we waited for the seven seals to be opened and saw them loosed one by one. But when the seventh seal was finally loosed and the end did not immediately come, it set into motion the seven trumpets that would sound upon the earth. And since John brings a report from eternity, it's difficult to assign a chronological and sequential element to these judgments. It is most important to emphasize that they are real, even if their sequence is hard to pin down. So we don't know the order. And it could be that the trumpets sound along with the seals being broken, each seal, or the trumpets actually do sound right after all the seals are finally broken. But again, that's not the important part. The important part is that all of this is very real and will happen. Regardless of the order, it is going to happen. And so the first four trumpets. So this is this next major part of chapter 8. We first, up through verse 6, we get a description of the angels and what the eighth angel does, and the previous seven angels preparing to sound their trumpets. And then we get to the actual trumpets sounding, and through the rest of chapter 8, we're going to get to see the first four trumpets. So the first trumpet brings a plague on the vegetation. Hail and fire followed, mingled with blood. In this case, blood may indicate the color or the result of the phenomenon described here. We don't know if the hail and the fire was red in color or if it brought forth red blood, but one way or the other, this should be understood as a straightforwardly without escaping into a creative symbolism. It is a destructive force. And we have a quote from Seiss. The truth is, if earth, trees, and grass do not mean earth, trees and grass, no man can tell what they mean. So if they are a symbolism, we don't know what they're symbolizing for. Otherwise, we take it just as that's what they mean. Letting go the literal significance of the record, we launch out upon an endless sea of sheer conjecture. So what he's summarizing there is this particular verse. We can take it very literal. It is talking about the earth, trees, and grass. There's no symbolism there that we're used to seeing in Revelation. We get a lot of symbolism throughout the Bible. But in this particular case, it doesn't make sense for it to be symbolism. It is literally talking about the earth, trees, and grass are being destroyed. And a third of the trees were burned, and all green grass was burned up. Because of this hail and fire, the trees and grass were destroyed. 1/3 of the vegetation of the planet is burned up during the Great Tribulation. And we'll see this trend throughout the rest of the first four trumpets, that a third of things are being destroyed. The biggest question is, how is this going to happen? Many wonder if it will happen through the phenomena we know today, like a nuclear war, fallout, pollution, meteoroids, and so forth, other natural phenomena that we could think of, or unnatural things that we can inflict upon ourselves. These ideas are interesting and possible, but they should never obscure the essential truth that God is bringing the judgment. While he can certainly work through evil men to bring judgment upon the earth, it is also very possible that he will bring the judgment through a supernatural method, a method that only he can inflict. He is not a passive bystander. This is not a nature taking its course, judgment. This is God bringing the judgment. God may use whatever method he desires to bring the judgment, but people on earth know these events are from God and do not think them to be merely natural disasters. So when we get to Revelation 16, verses 9, 11, and Revelation chapter 19, we will start to see a little bit more clearly how the people on earth are they are aware that this judgment, these disasters, the third of the vegetation, everything else being destroyed, it is God's judgment. They know that it is his judgment and not just a byproduct of something that man has done. Moving on to verses 8 through 9, the second trumpet brings a plague to the sea. So we start out with the plague with the vegetation, something that we can very much relate to. We've experienced plagues in the past throughout history, but this one's different. This one's bringing it to the sea. And so John very carefully says this phrase, something like a great mountain. This is not an actual mountain. He does use the word like, or the equivalent thereof, but it is a blazing mass large as a mountain. And a third of the sea becomes blood. This disaster is a cataclysm, perhaps a meteoroid that crashes into the sea and the results in a great oceanic upheaval with residual pollution. Researchers today say that this sort of phenomenon has happened before in the history of the earth, sometimes resulting in a great ecological upheaval and disaster. Here the result is that a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. And the blood, again, we're seeing blood being used here, may either be the cause or the effect of the widespread death in the oceans of the world. And the sea may be a specific reference to the Mediterranean and not a reference to all oceans. In the world of the Apostle John, again, this is going back to context of when the Bible was written, and from the perspective of the Apostle John, the Mediterranean Sea was the sea. They were not aware of the rest of the oceans that we are aware of now, and they really had little knowledge. Saying the same thing I just said. They had very little knowledge of the other oceans. Now, we can take this as that, from their perspective, the sea is the Mediterranean. Or we can take this as this could potentially be one of those, just a slight representational. The sea is referencing the sea from whatever perspective you have. So for our perspective, we have all the different oceans. So it could be the 1/3 of our oceans and not just 1/3 of the Mediterranean. I feel that it's probably a whole 1/3 of all of our oceans, being that very specifically we're told a third of the living creatures in the boats will be destroyed. And if it was only just 1/3 of that lives in the Mediterranean Sea, well, then it's not quite 1/3 anymore. But an interesting thing to ponder there, is it from their perspective that all they see is Mediterranean? Or was John, in fact, perhaps seeing the entire earth and seeing all the oceans, and immediately it's like, okay, there's the sea, and 1/3 of the sea has been destroyed, and it's not necessarily just the Mediterranean. Food for thought. Chapter 8 still, verses 10 and 11. The third trumpet brings the plague on the fresh waters. So we're moving from the sea, from the salt water, from the oceans, into the lakes and rivers that are typically surrounded by land on the continents, the water that we are sustained by for life. In this case, not a mountain, but a star falls from heaven, burning like a torch. We may easily associate this with a comet or a meteor crashing into the earth and bringing ecological disaster. But God, he may have something else in mind as well. Since the star is specifically named as wormwood, we know that wormwood is a very bitter substance, and the proverbial for bitterness and sadness. Sorry if I'm getting some of those words pronounced incorrectly. And again, a third of the rivers and the waters are affected by this. The proportion of ecological disaster stays the same in each of the trumpets. A third of the ecological system is destroyed in this judgment. And of course we see that people still drink of the water because they need water to survive, but those that drink of the the water that was hit by the wormwood star, they die because it is bitter. And then verses 12 and 13, the fourth and final trumpet for today's lesson. The trumpet begins a plague on the heavens and darkness on earth. The third day did not shine, and likewise a third of the night. This does not describe a 1/3 lessening of light, but a 1/3 of the day and night are plunged into absolute darkness. As Jesus said, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, from Matthew 24, verse 29. So this is a very unique situation. We do have parts of the world that spend a good deal of their year in darkness, but that darkness is still lit by stars and the moon in most cases. It's not a total darkness. This particular plague here is actually going to take 1/3 of light and from the daytime from the sun, and 1/3 of the nighttime from the moon and the stars, and just completely shut it out. It's going to be complete darkness. Imagine spending 1/3 of your day and then 1/3 of your night in a closet, completely sealed up, and the lights turned out, and that is what it's going to be here. And still trying, not just sitting, but still trying to live your life during that time. That is the fourth trumpet. A few observations and some food for thought here on the first four trumpets. These first four trumpets reveal the severity of God's judgment. He attacks all the ordinary means of subsistence, all the ordinary means that we try and stay alive, such as food, water. He attacks all the ordinary means of comfort and knowledge, such as light and the regular rhythm of days. And man has come to see these aspects of the created order as impersonal, perpetual forces. We take them for granted. We don't necessarily feel like this is something that could just go away. During the Great Tribulation, God proclaims his lordship through their agonizing disruption, so showing his power over these items. He's declaring and showing that he is God and has absolute control. We also know that a great humility that comes upon men in the midst of something like an earthquake, because they know that nature is not as reliable as they had thought. With these four trumpets, that effect will be multiplied more. Just imagine any situation you've been in where it's like nature has put you on edge, or has put you in a situation where like you don't know, that there's nothing you can do. You have to rely on just nature to not take over. Imagine if you were in an earthquake, not some simple tremor that we get here in South Carolina on occasion, something like in California where they lose buildings collapse from these earthquakes, or even sinkholes, or being trapped in a fire started by a lightning strike in a forest, or something of that nature. Just something that man did not start, something that just is a natural course, and you have no control over it. And imagine that on a scale greater than we can imagine. The first four trumpets also reveal the mercy of God's judgment. These are partial judgments striking only 1/3 of everything, and are meant to warn and lead a rebellious world to repentance before the final curtain. For now, God spares more than he smites. So this is absolutely a sign that he's still willing. There's still time for these people to repent and come to God. He's only affecting 1/3 of the world. It is a warning shot across the proverbial bow of the earth to let us know, hey, judgment is coming. And that is a great mercy that God shows, especially when he has given us all the time in the world that we have up until that point. He's like, you still have a little bit of time. So that is chapter 8. We will be, as mentioned on the church website, we'll be doing Sunday school as often as we can. And as kind of referred to earlier, I am in the process of getting ready to move, so my time is getting pulled in many different directions. So I'll continue to record or live stream as much as I can on these Sunday school lessons, continuing with Revelation, and of course the next one being Revelation chapter 9. And until then, for right now, I think what we'll go on to this part right there. So if you would still like to give to the church, tithes, offerings, etc., Jeff does a much better job of "we are called to give" speech there than I am able to. But you can send checks to P.O. Box 38, Williamston, South Carolina, 29697. Of course, made out to Faith Presbyterian. Or you can search for us online through Givelify. Search Faith Presbyterian Church Williamston on there to find the correct church. And of course, there's always stuff to do around the church. You can give your time, talents, skills that you have. One of the biggest ones that we can actually point to right now is that we are looking for somebody that I can show the ropes on the IT, YouTube streaming, and such. We would rather have that in place quicker than later for my eventual departure. So until next time, we will wish you well and be praying for everybody that is dealing with the COVID.